Interesting, since it's so much more difficult to even obtain a firearm in California than it is in Texas. We're the Armed Attorneys. Today we're talking about California versus Texas, specifically so-called mass shootings and how mass shootings have played out in 2022 in both California and Texas. Stick around, we're going to talk about how many have occurred this year, what the results are in terms of how deadly they've been, and why we're making this comparison, and maybe why some of the results, which are quite interesting, are the way they are. But before we get into your support for the Second Amendment by hitting the like button.
And the first question we have on this is, why are we comparing the two? And I think there's a lot of good reasons why Texas and California are good subjects to be compared to one another. They have relatively the same population. They both have, urban areas and rural areas. They have...
In terms of land mass, we're both huge.
Yeah, exactly right. You get stuck in traffic for 2 hours, depending on where you are.
Yeah, similar road rage situations.
But where they differ is with their gun laws.
Yeah, and so we really can look at some fairly similar metrics, but very, very different gun laws and see what do those gun laws really do for us one way or the other. And, we came across this website sort of organically talking about, we were looking into the Sacramento shooting that just happened in April of 2022, which turned out to be a gang shooting, essentially. But, that's, I guess, still a work in progress. We're still learning.
Prepare for that event to be memory hold.
Exactly. So we're looking at, what are the details on mass shootings between these two states? And of course, everyone defines mass shootings differently, but we stumbled upon this website and looked and saw that, for the year 2022, the states of Texas and California have both had the exact number thus far in April, the exact same number of quote unquote mass shootings for the year. They have each experienced 13. Interesting, since it's so much more difficult to even obtain a firearm in California than it is in Texas. But then I think there was a much more interesting statistic that accompanied that. What is that?
Yeah, and that was the actual number of casualties arising out of, these two sets of mass shootings. And the difference is 25 deaths in California and 16 deaths in the state of Texas. Now, why I think these numbers are worth pointing out is because just that. The gun laws. California, it's very difficult to obtain a license in many of these counties to carry concealed. They have numerous restrictions on what types of weapons you can possess. You have to go through a background check for every single weapon. You have to go through a background check for ammunition. And, there's, even if you do get access to one of these licenses or permits issued by the county sheriff, there are additional restrictions on where you can carry. Compare that to Texas.
Yeah, Texas, of course, we've got constitutional carry here. That happened September 1st of 2021. Very few restrictions on where you can take that firearm. And we have some gun-free zones, but not a whole heck of a lot when you look at other states. Plus, if it's legal under federal law, it's legal under Texas law. Plus some things that are legal under Texas law, not under federal law, although we all know how that works out practically. But, Texas, relatively free. To give you an idea, the Gifford Center, which is, of course, an anti-gun group, they maintain a website where they rank states based on their gun laws. And bear in mind, this is an anti-gun group. So the state of California gets this perfect A+. They essentially do everything right.
Yeah, and if you look on the website, there is all pros and no cons. The Gifford Center gives them a perfect score. There's no additional gun laws suggested for the state of California. They are perfect. Yeah. Compared to Texas, which gets an F.
We get an F, yeah. We get the worst grade they can possibly give out. If you want to know what gun laws are really like in any given state, actually, I don't dislike the Gifford site, believe it or not, because their summaries of gun laws in states are actually quite accurate. Legally, it's a good site. You can consult it, just look at the letter grade and flip it for your purposes. Like, Texas gets an F, that actually means it's a very free state.
Yeah.
Yay, Second Amendment in Texas. We have, according to Giffords, Texas does everything wrong. And yet, when you look at this metric of deadly mass shootings, Texas, which gets an F in gun law, is actually doing way better than the state of California.
Yeah.
And we can only speculate, but we have speculated wildly about why that is.
Yeah, enter wild speculation mode. And we do have these studies from a lot of law enforcement sources.
The FBI, yeah.
Yeah, about how long the duration of mass shootings and the number of casualties out of mass shootings. And one of the biggest determining factors is resistance to the shooter.
Armed resistance specifically.
Armed resistance to the shooter. And we kind of come to that conclusion here. Is there an opportunity for armed resistance in the state of California compared to Texas? And the two seem to be misaligned.
Sure. Or even, I mean, think about and it's hard to break down, well, how many of these shootings were actually stopped by armed resistance?
Right.
But think about even the fear of armed resistance.
Oh, yeah.
Does that stop someone's, I mean, do those guys in California, bolt slower, than they would have otherwise, because they're not worried about your everyday victim pulling out a firearm and stopping them?
No, and we see that the same thing with home invasions in the United Kingdom compared to home invasions in the United States generally. If somebody is home, in the United States, the chances that a armed assailant breaks into a house goes down way off a cliff. Whether someone is home seems to make almost no difference in the United Kingdom because they don't have firearms. And so, we can draw a lot of these analogies with Texas and California.
Oh, yeah. So, I think this is just something to watch and study. California, for all of your highly restrictive gun laws, they don't seem to be helping you that much. So maybe someone there should how do I get a hold of Newsom?
I don't have. Got a bunch of money? We hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, consider subscribing, hit that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video.
And please question and comment below. As always, we love to hear from you. Until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.